Shalom everybody, and welcome to Translating Hebrew. This is week number 8, the last class in the translation series. If you are joining us for the first time, this will probably be a little bit above your learning level. We do have classes for beginner, advanced, and intermediate, not in that order. Beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Beginner goes through the alphabet and vowels, and intermediate starts with the basic grammar. Those are all on YouTube. You can find those on the Passion for Truth YouTube channel, which is called Passion for Truth Video. Go to youtube.com, search for Passion for Truth Video, and there's a whole playlist that is the previous Hebrew classes. And the notes for this class today can be found, as always, at theregathering.com/page/PFT Hebrew 4. So, welcome to our last class. So we're going to wrap up the translation series and kind of try to give a little bit of insight as to where to go from here if you followed us to this point, where to go from here to continue learning Hebrew, since this series in particular is coming to a close. So I want to cover some basic things. Kind of the idea of this whole series was just to give sort of a forest-sized view of the language rather than focusing on the individual trees, as it were, so that whenever you do go into a course that goes into greater detail, you have an idea of where you're going. So I want to wrap up that whole idea today, so you kind of have a feel for kind of the overall structure of the language. The last thing, real major thing that I need to touch on is the rest of the binyanim. Of course, the binyan, a binyan is a category of a conjugation of a verb. And so there are 7 major binyanim in Hebrew, and so far we have covered 3 of them in this class. So the 3 that we've covered have been binyan kal, which you can also call binyan pa'al. And binyan kal is the simple or the plain meaning of the verb. So no strings attached, no extra connotations. If the verb means to walk, okay, halach, which means to walk, then when it's conjugated in binyan kal, the meaning is to walk. There's nothing extra added. It's just straightforward. Whatever the action is, that's what's being done. The other 2 binyanim that we've covered so far are the PL, which is very similar to the kal, but it usually adds a bit of a nuance to the word. A lot of times that nuance is sort of an intensive form of the same action. All right, so if there's a verb that in the kal means to break, in the PL it means to shatter into pieces. It's a more forceful, more intense, sort of an amplified version of the kal meaning. Usually, sometimes the PL is just is very similar to the kal meaning, like in the word davar, or just the root dalet beit resh. Davar as a noun means a word, but as a verb it means to speak. And so it's not a more intense form of speaking than any other form per se, but it's always conjugated in the PL. So it becomes diber, for he spoke. All right, so there's the kal, the PL, and then the hifil is the other one that we've covered, and the hifil usually adds a causative sense to the verb. So rather than, if the root of the word is to walk, then if this was conjugated in the hifil, it would mean to cause to walk, okay, to cause somebody else to do the action. All right, so those are the 3 binyanim that we've covered so far: the kal, the PL, and the hifil. And all 3 of those binyanim are considered active, or the verbs that are conjugated in those binyanim are considered to be in the active voice. What this means is that the subject of the sentence in which that verb is used is the one that's performing the action that's designated by the verb. Okay, so if the verb is to eat, all right, and we say he ate, okay, which would be hu achal, all right, he ate, he is the subject of the sentence, all right, and he's the one doing the eating. There is also a passive voice, and we have this in all languages, including English. In English, we would say he was eaten, right, which is an unfortunate sentence to have to say, but if he is a fish, the fish could be eating, or it could have been eaten. All right, either one is equally plausible in a sentence. But in the passive voice, the subject of the sentence is the one that the verb is acting upon rather than the one who is acting out the verb. Okay? And so these are three binyanim that correspond to the active voice. There are also three binyanim that correspond to the passive voice. And so the first conjugation chart in the notes for this week is the first of these binyanim that I wish to talk about, and that is binyan nifal. And on the chart, I have it spelled out in Hebrew in the upper right. Okay, so I don't have it spelled out in English, but it does say nifal. The nifal is basically the same sense of the verb as the kal, so it's just the plain meaning of the verb, but it is in the passive voice. So instead of if the verb was to eat, okay, the nifal would mean to be eaten. Okay, so instead of the one doing the eating, the subject of the sentence is the one being eaten. And so I have some scriptural examples of these different binyanim. So I'll go ahead and run through those so we can get a little bit of translation in. The verse I have that demonstrates binyan nifal is Exodus 14:21. I do not have notes for that online, but if you have access to a Hebrew scriptures, then if you can look up Exodus 14:21, we can find it there. I'll write the word here just so you can see it, but you can get the whole verse in context if you can go to it yourself. Exodus 14:21 is talking about the crossing of the Red Sea. All right, and I won't read the whole verse in Hebrew, but Moses held out his arm over the sea, and Yahweh drove back the sea with a strong east wind all that night, and turned the sea into dry ground. The waters were split. And what I want to focus on in the Hebrew is the last two words of this verse. Sure, I've got all the pointing correct on that. All right. Vayivka'u hamayim, the last two words of Exodus 14:21. And hello. And talking about binyan nifal. And so, the root of this verb right here is beit kuf ayin. Which means to divide. Okay. So this verb here we can see, take off the vav at the beginning, and we are left with yivka'u. The beginning and ending we can identify as the prefix and suffix that correspond to, in the conjugation chart, the third person masculine plural, past tense. I'm sorry, future tense. So future tense, third person masculine plural. And the vowel pattern corresponds to the nifal. And so hamayim is the subject of this sentence, or of this phrase, the waters. So it's not that the waters divided something else, but this is nifal, the passive voice, so the waters were divided. Okay, the division was enacted upon the waters. They didn't divide themselves, okay, or they didn't divide anything else. They were divided. Okay, so again, just a refresher on basic verb structure. This is the future tense, but the vav inverts it. So, and the waters were divided is how this is translated. All right, so you see how that works with the passive voice. Okay, the subject of the sentence within the active voice is the one performing the verb, and in the passive voice is the one that the verb is being performed upon. So it sort of flips places with the object of the sentence, with the passive voice. But passive voice comes in very handy in sentences that have no object. They only have a subject. So, and the basic characteristics that you can use to identify binyan nifal when you come upon it are that in the past tense there's always the nun chirik prefix. You see that on the chart. And in the future tense, everything is the same as the call except for the vowel pattern. So the first radical will always take a dagesh. And the usual vowel pattern is a comets under the first radical, and I'm having a short brain lapse here about what the second radical usually is. I believe, though, it is a tzera for the nifal. That doesn't look right, though. But regardless,
I thought it was a thing. It was a stop under the first.
I think it actually is a tzera.
Sure, it's not a stop under the first. All.
In the past tense, it is. In the past tense, it's yes. In the past tense, it's nif al, so it's got the shva and then a patach underneath the second radical. I don't know why I just did this morning. I don't know why I can't remember exactly the future tense, but that looks right. Anyway, it's on the chart, so the chart is accurate. I did check that. My memory is just failing me right now. But you'll notice the first radical has a dagesh, and the vowel pattern, everything looks exactly the same as binyan kal, but the vowel pattern is different, and that chart illustrates the differences. And I know this comments is correct, and I'm pretty sure that tzera is correct too. So that is binyan nifal. All right, the next binyan is also in the passive voice.
You're right. It's the I, the A, and the A, and the E. Long E.
Yes, okay, so I've just gotten confirmation that in fact I was right. I couldn't think of any other vowel that it would be. And, but anyway, so that is binyan nifal, and those are its characteristics. The chart is on there, so you can see that regardless. All right, so the next one is called pual. And verbs conjugated in binyan pual have the same sense as verb conjugated in the PL, so it's the same sort of intensive or extra nuance to the verb, but they are in the passive voice. So instead of acting out the PL verb, they're having the PL verb acted upon them. And so an example I have, well, exactly. Example I have of that is Proverbs 13:18. And this doesn't illustrate the intensity so well, but it is a conjugation in binyan PL. Like I say, not all of the extra sense that's added to the verb is always intensive. It's just more often than not that is the sense of the PL. But in Proverbs 13:18, and I'm focusing on the second half of the verse, but it says, "Poverty and humiliation are for him who spurns discipline." And then the second half, "But he who takes reproof to heart gets honor." And so this is sort of a paraphrase translation here, but "Vishomer tochachat Yehubad. So Vishomer is, and the one who guards, or the one who keeps. Tochachat, which is reproof or correction. Okay. Yehubad.
He will become heavy with honor.
Yes.
Give him glory.
Yehubad. So the root of this is Kaf Beit Dalet. And this has sort of two meanings. The basic meaning is to be heavy. And
Pharaoh's heart.
yes, Pharaoh's heart was made heavy at one point, or hardened. Hello, welcome. But the other meaning, which has to do with weight, but in a more metaphorical sense, is to give honor. And so, yes, or glory is another translation. So Yehubad. So the subject of this sentence is the one who guards or who keeps the correction that he's given, or who accepts it. And it says Yehubad. So it's not that he will glorify something else, but it's that he will be glorified or he will be honored. So this is conjugated in Binyan Pual. And we're quite a ways along in the language right now, so I apologize if you're a little bit lost. But so the main characteristic of the Pual is the presence of the kubutz vowel, which you will only find in Binyan Pual. So if you see a kubutz in a verb conjugation, you can be pretty sure that it is being conjugated in Binyan Pual. The second vowel is usually a patach, and just like the PL, the second radical always takes a dagesh in the Pual. Okay. So we have one more binyan that is conjugated in the passive voice, and that is the hafal. And as you might imagine, the hafal adds the same sense to the verb that the hifil does, namely the causative sense. So a verb that's conjugated in binyan hafal, rather than being the one that's doing the causing, it's the one being caused to do something. Now, in some sense, to be caused to do something is not very different than just doing it. So the hafal is probably the least used binyan because it has very sort of specialized uses. There's only certain cases where it would be more appropriate to use the hafal than to use, say, the pa'al or the pl. All right, it's kind of a double reversal. You know, you're being caused to do something is it's an extra layer of complexity. But there are certain cases where it is in fact appropriate. So I have a couple examples of those places. One is Jeremiah 39, verse 2. And I'm focusing again on the last two words of that verse. Just to give a little context, this is talking about Jerusalem being sieged by Babylon. And so the end of verse 2, the last two words, in English it says the walls of the city were breached. But the last two words in Hebrew, havka'ah, ha'ir. Okay. Ir is city, so ha'ir is the city, referring to Jerusalem. The verb root here is the same one that we saw just a few verses ago, okay, beit kuf ayin, which means to divide. And so if if you look on your Hafal chart, the conjugation of this is it's the past tense, third person, feminine singular. Okay, because ear, even though it looks like a masculine word, is in fact a feminine noun. So it has to be modified by a feminine verb. So the root of this is to divide. So the city is not dividing anything, and it's not dividing itself. Okay, it was caused to be divided, is literally what this is saying. You could just say that it was divided, okay, say in the Nithal or the Pual, but the cause to be divided adds a little more force, or the idea of an army coming in and forcing the walls apart. And that's usually kind of the sense of the Hafal is a really somebody being subjected to something involuntarily. All right, is usually the sense that is added to the Hafal. And a great example of that is the other verse that I have to demonstrate it, which is Deuteronomy 13, it's verse 6 in a Hebrew Bible, and it's verse 5 in an English Bible. So if you're following along in the Hebrew, it will be in verse 6. And so Deuteronomy 13, the whole chapter is talking about false prophets and how to deal with somebody who comes in the name of Yahweh but says things that are not true. And so the whole verse reads, "As for that prophet or dream diviner, he shall be put to death, for he urged disloyalty to Yahweh your God, who freed you from the land of Egypt and who redeemed you from the house of bondage, to make you stray from the path that Yahweh your God commanded you to follow. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst." The part of this I want to focus on is actually a little earlier in the text. So I'll just read off the first few words and then get to the word I want to focus on. The Hanavi, so that's and the prophet, Hahu, that prophet, the one they've been talking about in the verses prior. O, or Cholem HaChalom. Cholem is a dreamer and Chalom is a dream, or that dreamer of the dream. Hahu, that dream. Okay, and this is the word I want to focus on. Yumat. Yumat. Now this is a very funny looking conjugation, and you won't see this in any of the charts that I've given because the root of this, yes, is Mem Vav Tav, which means to die. So you'll notice that the middle radical is a Vav, so it falls under the conjugation Ayin Vav, and I have not given the conjugation Ayin Vav for the Hafal. But just take my word for it that this is in fact Binyan Hafal conjugated in Gizrat Ayin Vav. So funny things happen when you've got these special Gizrot. So this Vav actually disappears, as it does in the Kal, and the prefix that's added is this Yod Vav with Shuruk. Okay, so this is the past tense, third person, or I'm sorry, this is the future tense, third person masculine singular. Okay, so if it was conjugated in another form, so if it was, say, the Kal, it would mean he will die. Now, why would it not just say he will die? Well, because that sounds like a promise. Like this is what's going to naturally happen to him if he says a false prophecy, but that's not what's being gotten at. It's not saying that he's just going to fall over dead. And similarly, it wouldn't make sense in the Hefil, he will cause to die, because he's not putting anybody else to death. It's in the Hafal. And it can't be in the Nifal because you can't passively die. Okay, you can't. To die is an intransitive verb. Okay, you can't die something else. If you die, you're just dying. Just like you can't jog something else. You're just jogging. Okay, it's an intransitive verb. It doesn't have an object. So what's left is the hafal. He will be caused to die. In other words, the responsibility is on you, who I'm talking to make sure this person dies. Specifically, just so there's no miscommunication on that, it's on the judges who make decisions in trials based upon the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, not on you. So just clear that up. Nobody should be stoning anybody without the proper court system in place. So, lest I be misinterpreted there, make sure I say that. But the hafal is the appropriate conjugation for this. He will be caused to die. Okay, it could be talking directly to the people and say, you will kill him, but it says it this way, which is also appropriate. There would be no other way to use the verb die, though, in relation to someone who's going to be put to death. This is the appropriate way to do it.
Otherwise, you'd have to do something like kill him.
Yes, otherwise you'd have to use the verb to kill, which is a transitive verb. It takes an object. You kill something. You don't just kill in general. But you do just die in general. So that is the hafal. Again, it is the least commonly used, probably the least commonly used. The pual isn't used all that much either. But because it's so specific, the hafal is probably the least commonly used binyan. But it is the counterpart of the hifil. It's just in the passive voice. So those are 6 of the 7 major binyanim. And there are other binyanim besides the major ones, but the major ones are, of course, the major ones. The final one is neither active voice nor passive voice. It is what's known as reflexive. And this is the hitpa'el. What reflexive means, well, it can mean a number of things. What reflexive means specifically is that the subject is acting upon itself. So he's doing the action to himself. Okay, so the subject is both the subject and the object. The hitpa'el doesn't have to necessarily be reflexive. It can also be repetitive. It can indicate an action that's being done over and over. Or it can be reciprocal. So it's an action that's being done back to something. So the hitpa'el is kind of a very specialized binyan because it either has the reflexive sense that something's doing something to itself, or on certain words it'll have certain nuances. Like when the hitpa'el is used on the verb to walk. Now you can't walk yourself, that doesn't make any sense, but what it means is to walk back and forth. Okay, or to just kind of walk around, to make circles or pace and actually, this is something you'll see quite a bit. So the verse I have that illustrates the hitpa'el is Genesis chapter 3, verse 8. And this is a great verse for illustrating hitpa'el because there are 2 verbs that are conjugated in the hitpa'el in this verse. And both of them are used in different senses. So 3:8 says, Vayishma'u et kol Yahweh Elohim. So, and they heard the voice of Yahweh God. Mithalech. Now, mithalech, this memtav prefix is actually the participle, so the present tense form, which I don't have on the sheet, so don't be too confused. And that's actually patach. Okay. So they heard the sound of Yahweh God mithalech, walking back and forth. The root here is halach, he lamed kaf, which means to walk. So conjugated in the hitpa'el, it means walking back and forth. Okay, so mithalech. Okay, Bagan in the garden. L'ruach hayom, which is in the windy part of the day. Vayitchabe. Vayitchabe. Okay, so cancel out the vav, and we're left with the, is that right? I'm having a double take here now.
Looks like it's a future that's been flipped.
It is. Oh, okay. Okay. I was doing a double take because this is a singular form. But it is in fact singular. It is future tense, third person, masculine, singular.
The man hid himself and the wife.
Yes. So yitchabe would mean, the root here, before I go any further, chet, beit, aleph, means to hide, to conceal. So it's not just that he hid himself, concealed himself. And the vav flips the tense. That would actually, yitchabe would mean he will conceal himself. The vav flips the tense, so it becomes past tense. He concealed himself. Okay, so it's an action that he did to himself. So the hitpa'el is used there. So here it's in the reflexive sense, which is what it's best known for, and here it's in the reciprocal sense, or the repetitive sense, back and forth. Okay. So, and hitpa'el is always identifiable by its funny prefix, which involves a tav. Okay, that's the only binyan where you see this two-letter prefix at the beginning, is the hitpa'el. So hitpa'el, yitpa'el, mit. You'll even see tav, okay, titpa'el. But in any case, you've always got this second tav that's intervening there. So that's the infinitive form is actually, it's funny. I don't remember it offhand, but it's a funny form. It's like different than all the others. But anyway, that's the biggest giveaway. And like the PL, whenever the second radical can take a dagesh, it will. So, okay. So those are the 7 major binyanim. I want to make sure that we've at least talked about them all before the series is totally over. So yes, the kal, the PL, the hifil, their passive counterparts, the nifal, the pual, and the hafal, and the one standing alone, the reflexive form hitpa'el. And there are other minor binyanim, but you'll encounter them much less frequently than any of these. So these are the main ones to know. The main ones you'll encounter in continuing Hebrew studies. So, any questions about the binyanim? Okay. The only other thing I want to point out about verb conjugation, and you walked in on the very last class that I'm doing, which is why this is kind of a summary wrap-up kind of thing. The only other thing I want to mention about verb conjugation is I mentioned a few of the gizrot. I've mentioned lamed aleph, when the third radical is an aleph. Lamed hey. Mentioned ayin vav and ayin yod, where the middle radical is a vav or a yod. So the other ones I want to just mention so that you know they exist are the pay pay Gizrot, so where the first radical is a particular letter. Those are pay Aleph, pay Yod, and pay Nun. So if the first radical is an Aleph, a Yod, or a Nun, then the conjugation of that verb will be a little bit different from the normal Shlamim conjugation. A lot of times it will involve these letters disappearing in the later conjugations. So that's how you can have these words that look really funny, and it can be kind of frustrating trying to find the root of the word when the very first letter of the root is totally gone in whatever verb you happen to be looking at. So those are the rest of them, and also sometimes people list them as their own Gizra. Really all it does is changes the vowels, but if any one of these three radicals is a guttural letter, and by a guttural letter I mean a chet or an ayin. If any one of the three is either a chet or an ayin, it's going to affect the vowels in the conjugation, but it will not affect the rest of the word. So you won't add any letters, you won't take any letters away. So it remains a Shlamim conjugation, which means that all the letters of the radical will stay there, but it will change the vowels. So sometimes those are listed as their own separate Gizra. Technically, you could figure it out if you knew all the rules of vowel changes. You just apply those in the situation, and because there's certain rules about how vowels behave around these particular letters. But sometimes they're just listed as their own Gizra, just to have it there, as something you can memorize, on a sheet instead of having to figure out every time you encounter a word. So, but they're really not their own Gizra because it's just a little vowel change. But sometimes you'll see them listed that way, though, and there's nothing wrong with memorizing them as Gizrot. I just think it clutters up the chart of Gizrot. So, but anyway, those are the ones I didn't mention are the pay Gizrot. Okay, so there are basically three more that I haven't touched on. And usually whatever the odd character is, okay, whatever the Gizra is named after, that letter is going to drop in certain conjugations. So those are the Gizrot. One other thing that just very briefly I want to touch on is I've talked about the present tense, and I've called it the active participle. And there's another part to the present tense, which is called the passive participle. And so it has the same sense as the passive binyanim that I've just been talking about, but the passive participle is actually, it's used in binyan kal. And so the active participle in binyan kal I'm just going to use the masculine singular form. Okay, first radical, and then vav with a cholam, second radical, third radical. Okay, so this is the pattern that follows. So if the subject is the one doing the acting and it's in the present tense, this is the form it's going to take. So he is walking. Okay, our root is halach, to walk. All right, applied to this form, it will become holech. He is walking. We use the three letters. Put the vav in between the first and second, put this vowel underneath the second, and that's how it goes. The passive participle pattern on that is this. First radical, comments. Second radical, vav with shuruk, and then third radical. So this is in the present tense, but it's the passive voice, so the subject of the sentence is having this done to them, rather than doing it. And the most common use of the passive participle that you will find is from this root right here, beit, resh, final kaf. Yes, this means to bless. And so when we apply the passive participle to this, we end up with Baruch. So the beginning of many, many prayers goes Baruch Atah. And so a lot of times we say, blessed are you. But what it's saying, you could also say, if it was just Baruch Atah, if that was a whole sentence on its own, which it could be, you are blessed is what that would mean. Okay, Baruch Atah. So it's not you're the one doing the blessing, but you're the one being blessed. Okay, and you'll see this passive form all over the place, but Baruch is by far the one you'll encounter the most. So, but now you'll recognize it when you see that form. You'll know, that's a passive participle. And there are many other senses of words that I have not managed to cover yet. There's a form known as the infinitive, which you'll encounter quite a bit. There are other such things. There's other volitional forms. I've talked about the jussive and the imperative just a little bit. There's also a form called the cohortative, which is in the first person. I've talked just a little bit about preterites, but there are also forms known as preterites. There's a lot more to the language than just what I've covered, but I just want to kind of illustrate some of that, just so you know what to look forward to. Oops. Okay, I want to talk a little bit. A number of people have asked about what materials I learned from or what materials I would recommend to learn Hebrew from. And it's difficult for me to give a recommendation per se. All I know is what I've used, and unless I've actually bought and used a number of resources, I can't say which one's better or worse. But I can comment on the ones that I have used and let you know what I think about them. One of them, probably can't read this, but this is called Introducing Biblical Hebrew. This is a book that I went through. It's by Alan P. Ross. And this book focuses on biblical Hebrew, and primarily biblical Hebrew. It does not delve into modern Hebrew or conversational Hebrew. It's all about translating the Bible. And I am not going to say it's a bad book. It is an excellent book, but it is very high-level stuff. It is geared toward linguists. So it'll use terms like the genitive case or the nominative case or, past preterite, name your linguistic term. It uses every single one of them. And some of them it explains what they mean, and some of them it just assumes that you already know. And I am not a linguist, and so I don't already know a number of these terms, so I was lost through some portions of the book. And Robbie can testify that it's not just me. Plenty of people who are, plenty of people who are plenty intelligent have difficulty with this just because they don't know the definitions of some of the terms. Because it is geared toward somebody who, if you already know another language, you know all the technical terms, or if you have a master's in English maybe, and you actually remember what all those crazy grammatical and terms mean, then you'll be just perfectly at home here. But and it's fine. I got through it. It just takes a lot longer for us normal folk to get through a book of this sort of technical capacity. So it's a great book, but it's difficult. So it covers the subject exactly the same as subject material that we're covering in this class, but it's difficult to go through. It's not a beginner level book. So I recommend it for people who are linguists. I don't necessarily recommend it for somebody who is not, unless you have a teacher who can explain everything that's going on. Another book that I used to learn from is this one. This is called Ha-Yesod, Fundamentals of Hebrew. It's by Luba U. Wheeler and Norman Bronsnick. This book focuses on modern Hebrew. So in this you'll learn the modern grammatical rules, which are very similar to the ancient ones, but they've tweaked them a little. And also you'll learn most of the modern vocabulary as opposed to the ancient vocabulary. So you probably won't learn the words for sacrifice and that kind of thing in here. You'll learn, but you will learn the words for bench and airplane and telephone and library and all that kind of thing. So this is great for modern Hebrew. It's much easier. It is a college level textbook, but it's much easier to go through than the one I just mentioned because it explains everything as it goes. It doesn't assume that you already know what it's talking about. But again, it's geared toward modern Hebrew. So I imagine you can probably find both. I know you can find that, the Biblical Hebrew book on Amazon. I would imagine you can find this on Amazon too, because you can find just about every book on Amazon. But anyway, so this is another one that I actually learned from. Again, I'm not saying it's better or worse than anything else. It's just the one that I used. I did look online a little bit to see if I could find some good free resources, and it is difficult to find good free resources for learning Hebrew. There's a lot of material to cover, and so people are not really apt to just provide that content for free. I know somebody who's using Rosetta Stone. Again, that focuses on modern Hebrew, specifically on modern conversational Hebrew. So if you want to learn how to speak it and be able to talk to someone, say, in Israel, that would be a great resource for that. Not so great for biblical, although you could transfer to biblical once you've kind of got speaking it in your head. There's nothing wrong with learning how to speak it, and that's something that I'm quite deficient in that I could benefit from. But again, that's a different direction from this class particularly. So, but he does speak highly of it, so I'll pass that along to you as well. There's also a website that talks about ancient Hebrew, but it's not so much good for learning it as a language. It's called ancient-hebrew.org. A lot of great research there, a lot of very interesting stuff. I'll go ahead and write that up here. Very, very educational site. I found this site years and years and years ago. And he does have some things on there about actually learning the language. He takes a little different approach to it, and it's by no means a comprehensive study of Hebrew. But it kind of goes back into the Paleo-Hebrew some, and I think he really does a good job on his scholarship and just on bringing out some very interesting things about the culture at the time and how the language developed. So that's a great resource. The main thing I can say, and this is unfortunate because this is something that's being offered for free, so most people that are watching this are probably inclined to look at things that are offered for free. But the very best way to learn Hebrew is to have a tutor or a teacher. Okay, go to Hebrew University or find somebody who's fluent in the language and have them tutor you. I had a tutor, and I showed you those books. I went through both of those books. It took me about a year of every day going through to get through both of those books. But I learned more in the 4 to 6 months that I was being tutored than I learned in both those books combined. I've been learning Hebrew off and on for the past 15 years, and I learned more in those 4 to 6 months I was being tutored than the rest of that collective time combined. There is no substitute for having somebody who knows what they're talking about directly teach you the language, that you can ask questions to, that you can have a good schedule that they'll hold you to, because that's the biggest thing with learning language is you have to be immersed in it all the time. Even when I was self-studying, I was spending an hour and a half to 2 hours a day going through trying to learn it, and I'm still not fluent. Okay, I'm not meaning that to be a discouragement. What I mean is a teacher is great. If you can find a teacher, that is the way to go. So I highly recommend that for self-study. Those are the books that I used, and you can try them. But can't speak highly enough about having a teacher. So that is my main recommendation. I wish I could be more helpful than that. And there are materials out there for self-study, so just track down whatever you can. Those books are available, but like I say, it's an uphill climb with that, and you have to be disciplined about it. If you're not doing it consistently, you're gonna have a lot of catch up to do, between the gaps. So it's definitely something you want to set your mind to and really hone in on. If you want to take it more advanced than what these 48 classes have gone, or however many classes, 32 classes have gone through. So want to put that out there. And any other questions or comments or other input on that note? I know Robbie has done a lot of self-teaching and has come a long way doing that, but he's in it. He's dedicated to it, and he's always reading, and he goes through the Torah portions in Hebrew now, and so that 2 hours exactly. It takes him a while to go through it, and it's not easy, but he's learned a lot without a teacher, and so you can do it too. It takes dedication.
The verbs are the hardest.
And yes, and the verbs are the hardest, as I will testify to as well. Okay, well, that being the case, I do want to make a point of, you see my face up here teaching this class, and as is the case with most productions of any kind, the face that you see isn't necessarily the one that's putting the most work into things. And of course I do put work into this, but there are people behind the scenes that you'll never see that deserve as much credit for this being available as I do. So first I want to thank my students who are actually here in the flesh. Anybody who's ever been here I want to thank, but Robbie has been here from the start pretty much, and Jonathan and Annie, who are not here today, have also been here from the start. So if you're watching, guys, thank you very much. They have provided the questions that I've responded to in the class. I haven't been just making that up. There are actually people here asking me questions. And so that's added some very informative content, and also they've added corrections when I've done things wrong up here, so they have aided in the accuracy of what I've been presenting you, and that's very important to me, so thank you very much, guys, for that. And also the entire PFT staff, staff of Passion for Truth Ministries is what makes it possible for this to be broadcast online. So I don't want to name names particularly lest I leave somebody out, but I know there's at least 10 people who have their hands in this thing. But one I will name, who's the main one who makes me look like I know what I'm doing up here, is Adam Barbie, so thank you, Adam. He kind of orchestrates all the technical stuff with the camera and the audio and the lighting, and helped me set up this board, and told me how to go about being in front of a camera, which I've never done before. So he deserves a whole lot of credit, and so you can send him your thanks, if you appreciate this course. So anyway, that being what it is, shalom, and I wish you the most success in your continued Hebrew studies. I'm retiring for a while. I may come back at some point to cover more advanced things, but I'm kind of at the limits of what I am competent at presenting. So, shalom to you all, and best wishes.